Evil Big Sugar. Billions dead. This sugar, it's addictive. It's insidious. It causes disease with every high. We have to expose the big sugar, evil tobacco, and all these factors. We have to. Big sugar, as it makes bacteria that take over your brain, make you crave more sugar.
The World Health Organization recommends we reduce our consumption of salt, trans fats, saturated fats, and added sugars. Why? Because consumption of such foods is the cause of at least 14 million deaths every year from chronic diseases. Several decades ago, it was heresy to talk about the impending global pandemic of obesity, but now we're seeing chronic disease rates skyrocket around the world. We have exported our Western diet to the far reaches of the planet, with white flour, sugar, fat, and animal-sourced foods replacing beans, peas, lentils, other vegetables, and whole grains. Understanding the reasons underlying this trend towards increased consumption of animal products, oils, and sugar, and the reduced consumption of whole plant foods begins with understanding the purposeful economic manipulations that have occurred since World War II relating to agricultural policies around the world. For example, the U.S. government, since early in the last century, has supported food production through subsidies and other policies, resulting in large surpluses of food commodities, meat, and calories. In this artificial market, large food producers and corporations, Big Ag and Big Food, became very profitable, and that may be part of the problem. Last year, Dr. Margaret Chan, the Director General of the World Health Organization, gave the opening address at a global conference on health promotion. One of the biggest challenges facing health promotion worldwide, she said, is that the efforts to prevent our top killers go against the business interests of powerful economic operators. It's not just big tobacco anymore. Public health must also contend with big food, big soda, big alcohol. All of these industries fear regulation and protect themselves by using the same tactics: front groups, lobbies, promises of self-regulation, lawsuits, and industry-funded research that confuses the evidence and keeps the public in doubt. And they should know. In 2003, the World Health Organization released a draft report outlining a global strategy to address issues of diet, making a series of rather tame recommendations. But 6 words in that report: limit the intake of free sugars, stimulated a remarkable series of events. Free sugars means added sugars. The food industry went to work. Within days, the sugar industry, through the Sugar Association, enlisted the support of officials high in the U.S. government and led a vigorous attack on both the report and the World Health Organization itself, culminating in a threat to get Congress to withdraw U.S. funding to the WHO. You know, the organization that deals with AIDS, malnutrition, infectious disease, bioterrorism, and more, threatened because of its stance on sugar. Just as the U.S. went to bat for U.S. tobacco companies and led the charge against World Health Organization's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. But the threat from the sugar industry was described by WHO insiders as worse than any pressure they ever got from the tobacco lobby. As revealed in an internal memo, the U.S. government apparently had a list of demands: deletion of all references to the science that experts compile on the matter, and having dietary guidelines are fine as long as there are no references to fat, oil, sugar, or salt. The threats failed to make the WHO withdraw their report. Entitled Diet, Nutrition, and the Prevention of Chronic Diseases, it formally launched and concluded that a diet low in saturated fat, sugar, and salt, and high in fruit and vegetables was required to tackle the epidemic rise in chronic diseases worldwide, though they did end up watering it down. GONE was referenced to the Comprehensive Scientific Report, and GONE was its call for recommendations to actually be translated into national guidelines. History has since repeated. At the last high-level UN meeting to address chronic diseases, we helped block a consensus on action after lobbying from the alcohol, food, tobacco, and drug industries. When asked why Michelle Obama's successful childhood obesity programs in the U.S. should not be modeled around the world, a U.S. official responded that they might harm American exports.
In our work on the evil corporations of death who make a living killing people, we need to make sure that we address Big Sugar and just what has happened with Big Sugar. And we've done an awful lot of work about that, but now recently it's been found that Big Sugar criminally paid scientists to divert attention from the damages that sugar does to blame it on cholesterol and fat. And here, oh my God, sugar is responsible for billions of people's deaths. So we really need to take a look at what sugar has done and the effects of sugar on this planet. And basically to recognize that the high glycemic sugar does damage us, whereas natural fruit sugar doesn't do that. But the high glycemic sugar is responsible for the damages even of the plague and slavery. Lots of damages, and we have a host of this. If you go to the Stop the Evil Ultra Rich, we have lots and lots of information about Big Sugar and the damages they've done.
You maniacs! You blew it up! Oh, damn you! God damn you all to hell!
I don't think Big Sugar will be remembered well in history from the damages and the people that they've killed.
Big Sugar loves this night. If it's a bit of a nightmare for parents, the prospect of so much sugar, it's a marketing dream for the sugar industry.
Shovel sugar into my gut. Give me the candy overload. Feed me junk till I explode.
In the 21st century, Halloween has become a $4 billion sugar festival.
Oh, sugar is good.
Big Sugar has a spooky history. Wars were fought over sugar.
Other than perhaps gold, no single substance has had a greater hand in shaping the history of the Western Hemisphere than sugar has.
Sugar was at the heart of slavery. We discover that in places like this American-owned plantation, slavery survives.
Every day they get on that cart, and every day they look at that same wall of sugarcane and begin cutting. The arm never stops.
In the 18th century, sugar was the target of progressives because it was so intricately tied to slavery. Today, we're fighting sugar for other reasons, the obesity epidemic being perhaps the major one.
Like the tobacco industry, Big Sugar casts doubt over the science. The science linking sugar and obesity, sugar and diabetes, even sugar and tooth decay. Like big tobacco, the sugar industry has remarkable access to power.
They're very shrewd and they're very savvy. They give magnanimously to both political parties.
They behave like big tobacco. They need to be treated like big tobacco.
This is a story of Big Sugar in all its dark majesty. About how it changed the world and how it still does, shaping politics, health, and history. Few Canadians have even a glimmering of how a sugar conspiracy changed the fate of Canada. It's one of history's most famous battles. Here at Quebec in 1759, Britain's James Wolfe vanquished the French and decided the destiny of Canada. At least, that's the official story. There is another version of how Canada came to be England's. It's a lost chapter in history.
Stream of popularity.
The story involves the richest men in the world at the time. It involves the politicians who did their bidding. But most of all, it involves the commodity that started wars. Adam Hochschild has written Bury the Chains, documenting sugar's leading role in war and slavery.
I think you got to look at sugar as the oil of the 18th century. Just as oil so much determines what happens in the world today, what countries try to gain what influence over what areas, what wars are fought, the two Gulf Wars and so forth. Sugar was really that commodity for the 18th century.
In the war news of 1759, England was completing its capture of Canada from France. But given sugar's importance, all eyes looked south. In a series of battles in the West Indies, England attacks and seizes the French islands of Guadeloupe and Martinique, France's most valuable possessions. They are considered a bigger prize than Canada. To make peace, England must compromise. Denis Vaugeois, a former Quebec Cultural Affairs Minister, is also a Canadian historian, one of the few who have researched the story.
C'est certain que même si l'Angleterre a eu carrément le dessus, elle ne pourra pas tout garder. Il va falloir, pendant les négociations, que l'Angleterre accepte de remettre à la France certaines des captures, certaines des prises qui ont eu lieu. Alors, il s'agit de savoir qu'est-ce qu'on va rendre à la France. Alors, il y en a qui disent pourquoi pas rendre le Canada, et d'autres qui disent mais pourquoi pas rendre la Guadeloupe, la Martinique.
Documents show that if the choice is based solely on commercial principles, it's no contest. Canada is a backwater with a struggling fur trade. The French sugar islands are far more lucrative, with Guadeloupe alone producing 43 times more revenue than Canada. Canada, even France didn't want it back.
La destination Canada n'était pas populaire. Quand Voltaire dit quelques arpents de neige, il fait allusion aussi aux hivers, à la neige et aux hivers froids.
In London, the stage is set for a political drama. In the choice between the French sugar islands and Canada, England's most influential lobby, Big Sugar, is about to play a fateful role. Historian Philip Jabour profiles their most powerful leader. The sugar planter, Member of Parliament, and the man called Alderman Sugarcane, William Beckford.
I think that Alderman Beckford could be seen really as the Rockefeller of his time. He was a man of immense wealth, based on 3 generations of sugar trading in Jamaica, where in fact he was born.
Sugar has made Beckford the richest man in the world. He and his fellow planters want no part of the French sugar islands, which would add unwanted competition and cut into their immense profits.
Alors, les planteurs anglais des Antilles font des affaires d'or et ils passent leur temps en partie dans les Antilles, en partie à Londres. Et quand ils sont à Londres, ils mènent le grand train, ils ont beaucoup d'argent, donc ils ont des domestiques, ils sont infiltrés partout. Et même, il y a quelques-uns qui sont députés au Parlement. Il y en a qui ont même carrément acheté des sièges au Parlement. C'est une époque où la politique est plus pourrie qu'à d'autres moments.
In 1763, as the House of Commons is about to choose between Canada and the French islands, the sugar lobby is at work behind the scenes to make sure the vote goes their way. MPs are wined and dined and much, much more.
Donc, les indices nous montrent que les planteurs vont prendre tous les moyens disponibles, c'est-à-dire verser des pots de vin, saouler les gens et les compromettre, pour être certain que le moment venu, ils appuieraient ce qu'ils souhaitaient.
In Parliament, the vote comes, and England chooses Canada. corruption plays a role, but all their influence would have been for naught if the British had not developed such a sweet tooth.
Moi, je dis souvent que si le Canada est devenu britannique, c'est parce que les Anglais boivent leur thé sucré. Quand on fait de l'histoire un petit peu, des fois on cherche des grandes explications. Hein? On cherche les héros, on cherche toutes sortes de grandes explications savantes. La vérité est souvent toute simple.
In the end, Big Sugar got its way. The lucrative French sugar islands are given back to France. England takes poor and cold Canada. France celebrates, saying England has traded sugar for snow. In the United States, Big Sugar has always had a sure sense of where the power lies and how to maneuver it to their great advantage. At the Capitol, key lawmakers in the Senate and the House of Representatives are sure to hear from the sugar industry almost from the moment they seek election. Big Sugar's power is centered in the state of Florida and the Everglades, a vast river of grass and water populated by birds, alligators, and sugar barons. Giant sections of the Everglades have been taken over by 3 big sugar companies. They are accused of despoiling the land and polluting the environment to make raw sugar. Almost all the sugar produced by U.S. sugar corporations is sold in the U.S. at a price up to 3 times what the rest of the world pays for sugar. Cheap sugar from often needy countries is kept out. It's a subsidy bonanza. In 1994, a freshman Republican congressman from Florida named Dan Miller, an opponent of big government programs, thought subsidizing Big Sugar was a bad idea.
It's bad for the American consumer because the United States, we pay 3 times the price of sugar as they do in Canada or other places where they have an open market on sugar. So the consumer is paying 3 times as much. Now that's not just the pack of sugar you get for your cup of coffee. It has impacts on dairy products, from the ice cream to the bread to the pastries, anything that uses sugar.
On the other side of the political spectrum from the polite, conservative, Canadian-born Dan Miller is the brash, liberal, Florida-born novelist and journalist Carl Hiaasen. Big Sugar makes them bedfellows.
My problem is subsidizing a crop that has zero nutritional benefit, that is not keeping anybody alive, is not helping a single person get through starvation. Subsidizing what amounts to a luxury crop like this, and at the same time letting these guys use the Everglades as a toilet. Giving them water for almost nothing, as much water as they wanted, as long as they wanted it, and let them pissing it right back into the Everglades at great environmental cost.
In Washington, Republican Dan Miller has no trouble finding congressmen from both parties to co-sponsor a bill to cut the $1.4 billion a year that goes to Big Sugar in Florida and other states.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
But on the day of the vote, something astonishing happens. 5 of his co-sponsors suddenly vote against the bill to defeat it.
It was rather amazing when you lose a co-sponsor, and it lost by 5 votes. I'm not sure why they changed. I know a lot of the media was questioning them on it, and it put them on the defensive. But, you know, money buys influence in Washington. There's no question about it.
In England, there is a hush surrounding the story of sugar and the great fortunes made, the great estates built, the great colleges created. At Oxford's All Souls College stands a magnificent library. It's called the Codrington, built through the largesse of one Christopher Codrington in the 1700s. His wealth came from sugar. On the east coast of Barbados, an Anglican seminary for West Indians. Yet another gift from the fabled Codrington fortune. In Barbados and in England, it was never polite to ask too many questions about how the Codrington sugar fortune came to be. But Adam Hochschild says it's worth remembering that behind many a great fortune is a great crime.
The crime was slavery, because all sugar cultivation at that time was done by slaves. And it was done by slaves working under the most horrible conditions of slaves almost anywhere in the Americas.
Lisa Codrington is a Toronto playwright looking for her past at the old Codrington sugar slave plantation. When she was 8, Lisa emigrated to Canada. It's her first trip back.
Was my family originally from slaves on his plantation or not? Or is this name it just so happens that my name is Codrington as well? I want to go back and find out how that all began, and who did you come from, and where did those people come from, and who brought them here?
At the Barbados National Archives, Lisa is trying to pick up the paper trail to her family's past.
I'm here because I want to research my family name, my Codrington name, which is my mom's name, and go back as far as slavery.
Historian Ron Hughes is not encouraging.
Well, you're not likely to be able to get back to slavery itself.
Okay.
You're going to find it difficult to prove that your ancestors were slaves on the Codrington estates.
But assisted by the archive staff and guided by Hughes, Lisa's search into slavery begins with a clue. Rose Evangeline, the name of her great-grandmother.
Oh, this is 1874.
Continue turning. Till you reach 1875.
Emily, Henry, Joseph, James, Milton, Augustus, Edith. No Rose.
Rose Evangeline.
Codrington. That could be it then.
Yeah, Rose Evangeline Codrington.
Lisa is now looking for her great-great-grandparents, Rose's parents, and evidence they were slaves on the Codrington sugar plantation. In West Palm Beach, this is the headquarters of the Florida Crystals Corporation, the largest of 3 big Florida sugar producers. The owners of Florida Crystals are mysterious Cuban exiles who live lavish lives in the fabled resort community of Palm Beach. One brother lives in this $6 million 21-room palace. His name is Jose Pepe Fanjul, and he's the family's designated Republican. He's close to the Bush family, the governor in Florida, the president in Washington. A few blocks away, another of the Fanjul brothers resides at this $11 million Palm Beach address. His name is Alfie Fanjul, and he's the Democrat in the family. Carl Hyacin.
They're very shrewd and they're very savvy. Of course, they're very much a part of Palm Beach society, the upper crust of Florida, but they give magnanimously to both political parties.
The most telling illustration of Big Sugar's power came during the Clinton administration. Alfie Fanjul's access is now a legend. It began when Al Gore, Clinton's vice president, proposed a 1 cent a pound tax on the sugar industry to clean up the Everglades. Big Sugar does not like taxes. The White House heard from an angry Mr. Fanjul immediately. His call was put straight through to the president, who was quite busy at the time.
Bill Clinton was able to take a call from one of them while he was being visited, if we shall use that word, by Monica Lewinsky in the Oval Office. She even remembered the phone call, along with a few other details, I understand. But the idea that one of them could get through to the President of the United States during what presumably would be a moment of privacy tells you how powerful they are and what kind of clout they have. And it continues with the current administration.
The proposed tax on big sugar is dropped. For the 2004 election, Democrats and Republicans received $3.1 million in campaign contributions from Big Sugar. In return, Congress votes $1.5 billion a year in subsidies. The Faneuil share of that is $65 million in subsidies, after donating $450,000 to the candidates.
That's what it's all about in this country is, you know, how much money you can generate for a candidate, and that buys you access. That's what gets you in the door. That's what gets your phone call answered when you're the president and you're in the middle of a romantic assignation in the Oval Office.
The society scene in Palm Beach is where sugar barons mix business with pleasure. The Faneuil family is famous for charitable fundraising, which is important when your reputation as an employer is controversial. In the 1980s, working conditions at the Faneuil's Florida sugar plantations had come under attack. Migrant workers were brought in from the Caribbean to cut cane. It was a harvest of shame.
The abuse was so horrible. It was basically indentured servitude. These people worked all day long for almost nothing. They went home that night, and if they wanted food, they had to buy it from the very same people they were working for.
The Faneuils fought off lawsuits, and in articles like this Vanity Fair spread, a lot of bad publicity. They tried to get rid of the public relations problem by mechanizing the harvest and firing the field hands.
There's no heart in this business. There's not a shred of compassion in this. It never has been. It's brutal, hard work, and the disgraceful conditions that existed here in Florida have simply been moved elsewhere in the hemisphere.
Church records may hold the final clue to Lisa Codrington's past.
Okay, so let's look for 1845.
You gotta find the margins.
With a Barbados cousin, Lisa is looking for documents proving that she is descended from slaves.
Right? You see she's Rosa in here and her baptism.
The bishop at the time was
They find it, the very page signed on their wedding day by her great-great-grandparents, Mary Christian and Joseph Codrington.
Joseph Codrington residing at the something as
Society.
This is Mary's ex right there.
It's proof there were Codrington slaves.
Mary Christian and Joseph Codrington ex right there too.
That's his name.
And that's his ex.
That's his ex. Cool.
There it is. It hurts you. I was just trying to read it.
But that's actually like they had this book and he actually wrote it in. Like this is actually the.
Yeah. Do you have anything for 1780?
1788.
You're right, because that's real deep in slavery now. We going.
Christopher Codrington, born in Barbados, polished in England, educated at Oxford, succeeded his father as a general, a governor, and the master of the Codrington sugar slave plantation. Codrington boasted about how well the Codrington slaves were treated by his family.
Such treatment earned my father their undying affection. The slaves paid his tomb regular visits, promising when they had done working for his son, they will come to him and be his faithful slaves in another world.
In the Caribbean Sea, the island of Hispaniola. Haiti on one side, the Dominican Republic on the other. So lucrative are the lush sugar fields that this was once the richest island on earth, fought over by French, Spanish, and British empires. Now it's in the American orbit. Today, most of the sugar industry is ruled by 3 corporations: a Dominican, a Mexican, and the largest, an American. There have been questions about labor practices on all of them. The American plantation, Centro Romana, is a 240,000-acre spread larger than some countries. It's owned back in Florida by the Fanjul family. President Jose Pepe Fanjul is very proud of it.
Central Romana has a very high and good reputation in the Dominican Republic, obviously. I can tell you that if you're Canadian television, the Dominican Republic standard of living, unfortunately, is not what it is. But I can assure you that Central Romana is the largest taxpayer, the largest employer in the island, and the most progressive employer in the Dominican Republic.
We sent video journalist Mark Elam on a fact-finding mission to the Dominican Republic. In the heat, he found a chilling story.
What I saw was straight out of a book before the Industrial Revolution. I felt like I had stepped back 200 years.
On the edge of a sugarcane field at the Fanjul Central Romana plantation, this is the Batey Plumita, a company shanty town for indentured Haitian sugarcane workers and their families.
The government helps get workers over from Haiti. They have these people called contracteros who sit along the border and try to entice the Haitian workers over, telling them that there's great paying jobs, the conditions are good, that they're going to be able to make enough money to feed their families, and they bring them over and sometimes take their passports in the process so that they can't return to Haiti once they're there.
Most of the estimated 650,000 Haitians working sugar in the Dominican Republic are kept stateless. They are pariahs, looked down upon by Spanish Dominicans, and forbidden to leave the sugar plantations. Felix is one of 90,000 Haitians at the Fanjul Central Romana plantation.
Yo tenía 40 años. Sí. ¿Y cuántos años estás acá en Dominicana? Bueno, yo creo que yo tenía 18 años.
He had been there for 18 years, brought over, by a contractero, and since then he found a wife, his 3 children. He doesn't eat for the day. He goes out in the morning without having any breakfast and cuts sugarcane until nighttime. When the food runs out in the house, the children go to the sugarcane fields, break off a piece of sugarcane, and sometimes that's what they have to eat for the day. That's dinner.
Sugarcane staves off hunger for a while, but rots their teeth. The sugar plantation workers of the Caribbean today are almost all from families brought from Africa as slaves.
Slavery is absolutely central to sugar. Sugar slavery was in many ways one of the most deadly forms of slavery. Cutting sugarcane by hand was and still is one of the hardest forms of labor on earth. The slaves who cut sugarcane, for the most part, were worked to death at a fairly early age.
On the old Codrington sugar slave plantation, Lisa Codrington meets Marcia Burrows, one of a new generation of historians in the West Indies. Lisa is trying to get inside the skin of her slave ancestors, of Mary Christian, her great-great-grandmother, a laborer on the Codrington plantation.
What would the morning of a female slave cutting sugarcane be like?
It's going to be a very active thing. Women easily are up about 4 o'clock in the morning before they go off to the fields. Remember that she might have been punished the day before, she might be injured, or she might be pregnant. She'd be doing what any female would be doing, getting up in the morning, providing for her family, and going to work. They'd have to make sure children are fed whatever food there is to provide for them. There might be a man in there like that they have to feed as well. And this is every single day that this will be happening.
In old Barbados, the cane was ground down in windmills. Today the process has been mechanized in steaming sugar factories. Adam Hochschild says processing sugarcane was deadlier than fieldwork.
Feeding the sugarcane into the sugar mill was a very dangerous process because the mills operated with large wooden rollers. The cane had to be fed through these rollers twice. If the slave was the least bit tired or careless or sleepy, which any of us would be after a 12-hour day in the fields, and his or her hand got caught in the rollers, there was somebody standing by with a hatchet to chop off the arm so that the slave's whole body wouldn't get carried through because these rollers had no brakes.
When you're there in the sugarcane fields, it's eerily beautiful. By 10 a.m., it's scorching. In the summertime, it gets up to 50 degrees sometimes. And the dust that comes off of the sugarcane once it's cut is stifling. Each man is expected to cut a ton of sugarcane a day. When they weigh it at the end of the day, if they've managed to cut a ton each, they get what works out to $2 US after cutting over 1,000 pounds of sugarcane in a day's work. There was no way for me to look at that wage and make any sense of it.
Leaving the plantation puts a worker at risk of being deported, so most stay put. This means they have to shop at the company store for the basic things of life. The prices here, on a Dominican-owned plantation, show the gouging that goes on. The prices are up to twice what they are in town. To pay for these groceries, he cut 1,000 kilos of sugarcane.
Como hambre, comprar las cosas ajenas no puede pagarlas. La gente está mal para mí, para todo el mundo.
It is a criminal act to employ children, harvesting, sowing, or loading sugarcane, but the sugar companies routinely flout the law. Father Christopher Hartley, a remarkable parish priest, is documenting the scene. He will bring it to the attention of the authorities, and when they refuse to act, will bring it to the court of public opinion. Father Hartley is making his Sunday rounds across a parish that's 700 square kilometers. He knows well all the major sugar plantations. Inspired by the famous nun of Calcutta, he is the Father Teresa of the cane cutters.
My intention is not to become a social justice champion or to create a revolution. I am where I am, fulfilling the mission I have been entrusted by the church as a shepherd of my flock.
No doctors come to shanty towns, so Father Hartley's mission to the cane cutters is medical as well.
¿Qué fue lo que le pasó en la mano? Se clavó la caña ahí. ¿Qué día fue esto? ¿Qué jour? Hace 10 días. ¿Y aquí qué le ha pasado a él?
Ese está enfermo.
¿De qué está enfermo?
Quiso quedar.
These are medical emergencies. The man is in danger of losing his hand, but the motorbike will have to do for an ambulance.
Porque cuando te lo atiendan en el hospital te van a dar una receta. ¿Tú has visto que hay una botica de la iglesia, al lado de la iglesia, que hay una farmacia?
Next door to his church, the priest has set up a small pharmacy so their prescription can be filled free.
Pero tú no me faltes eso, ¿eh? Que no vuelvan ellos, muchachos, aquí sin la medicina.
I filmed this on a bete owned by a Dominican planter, but the almost non-existent medical care is constant across all the sugar plantations.
At a Tony Palm Beach restaurant, Jose Pepe Fanjo is hosting Florida Glitterati to raise money for charity. The sugar baron is on a charm offensive to convince Floridians that he is a good employer. Mr. Fanjul says it's unfair to focus on his sumptuous lifestyle.
You guys are sensationalists, and you try to do a sensationalist thing. Now you're trying to say, look at the way Van Hol lives. He has a nice car and the Florida Crystals building. That's your story. You've written it. That's the way you're going to have it. Nothing I can do about it. Have fun. Have
in
fun
Central
doing
Nana,
it.
people go to bed in squalor every night, Mr. Van Hol. That's very, very clear. And it doesn't seem to bother you one whit.
No, it just bothers me. It bothers me. I would hate to have anybody go to bed without food or without adequate medical care and all that. Obviously, it bothers me. That's an insult to me. Which what I'm saying to you is that if you want to write or have it produced a TV thing of it, go and look at what we've done there, and then make up your mind.
Toronto writer Lisa Codrington's quest for her roots requires a disquieting journey into slavery and all its chambers. The art of the time provides unsettling clues about the master-slave relationship.
It's just really disturbing. I think it was a perceived image of your slave. Like you'd like them to be obedient, almost stone. Sort of this half kind of smile, glazed over eyes with nothing behind, just constant obedience.
Household slaves had to deal with the master and his appetites at close quarters. Documents archived in the Public Records Office in London depict Christopher Codrington as a sexual predator, describing him as an incestuous man who kept continually about him a seraglio of slave women for his use. He fathered children by them, bastards they were called. If the husbands of these women rebelled, they were hunted down like animals. Whites believed slaves had no souls, so they could be whipped, maimed, and tortured. 7 million Africans were transported to the Americas in the 1700s, mostly for big sugar. In Barbados, within 8 years, more than half would be dead, killed by brutality and starvation. In the Dominican Republic, the Van Hols purchased the Central Romana plantation with its thousands of Haitian workers from the Gulf and Western Corporation. We inquired whether life got better or worse under the Van Hols, say in the last decade.
Ahora es muy malo.
¿Es más malo?
Más malo ahora. No había nada para comer. Porque siempre viene. Mira hasta ahora. Todavía uno no come nada. Todavía hasta ahora uno no come nada trabajando, tirando machete sin comer.
This is the Batey Salado on the Van Hol Central Romana plantation. The women are waiting for the men to come back from the fields. For the cane cutters and their families, it will be the first meal of the day.
Habichuelas. ¿Para cuánta gente tiene que comer aquí? Aquí comemos 16 personas.
Van Hol security is never far away.
I met one family that had tried to grow some of their own vegetables, but it's against the rules. Even the families that have tried to plant vegetables have them torn up by the company. I mean, they live in a small police state. There's these guys on horseback wearing pith helmets who ride through town just to make sure that everybody's towing the line.
Lisa comes to the church where her great-great-grandparents Mary and Joseph, walked down the aisle, slaves marrying in a Christian church. This was the doing of slave master Codrington. In 1702, Codrington wrote out his will, deeding his sugar plantation to the Anglican Church on the condition his slaves not be freed. He thought slavery was compatible with Christianity, and for the next 120 years, so did the Church of England. Codrington's slaves discovered the church was a ruthless slave master, even boasting its own logo, the word society, which was branded into the flesh of all its slaves.
The Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts, the church's missionary arm, of which the Archbishop of Canterbury and various professors of divinity at Oxford and Cambridge were on the board of directors, and a number of bishops of the church. And it is amazing to me that during all of this time, these people never seem to have questioned the institution of slavery.
As Codrington's slaves, Lisa's family were branded by the Church of England. Lisa tries to make sense of the horror of slavery, but she has a hard time comprehending.
To sit down and try and understand slavery is near impossible, because you can't just sit down and understand it. It's just beyond me. It's just, I mean, living in the world now in Canada, in Toronto, I have no conception of what it's like to have no rights whatsoever.
In the Dominican Republic, next door to their immense sugar plantation, the Fanjul's own Casa de Campo, a world-class resort boasting spectacular golf courses, luxurious pools, groomed beaches, polo grounds, and an amphitheater with a nightly extravaganza.
When you enter the front gates, you leave behind the pre-industrial age and you enter a world of luxury.
Here the Fanjul family entertained their friends, including in 2001, the first President, George Bush.
Someone working in the sugarcane fields would have to work a year in order to spend a single night at Casa de Campo. All that Felix owns after 18 years of working in the sugarcane fields is a worn machete and the tattered clothes that he wears to work.
We find people that basically can't make enough to eat before they go into the fields.
I don't believe that. I think that you're looking at other places that are not Central Romana. You find out if that's Central Romana.
It was Central Romana. We were there.
In the area, but it's probably not Central Romana.
In Central Romana, this is the Batey Plumita, one of 183 shanty towns owned by the Fanjul family. These are Central Romana overseers employed by the Fanjuls. And these are his hungry sugarcane workers, who are forbidden from planting gardens to feed themselves. Their employer says it's unfair to use a North American standard to measure conditions at Central Romana. After all, he says, they are providing jobs for Haitians who would otherwise have none.
These aren't jobs that they're giving them. It's a lifetime of indentured labor. I would like the Fanjuls and perhaps some of their board members to come down to the fields and try it for a day. I'm quite sure there's a way that the Fanjuls could make profit and at the same time provide, at the very least, food for these people.
Battle Against the Ultra-Rich. Big Sugar, Part 2.
In the 21st century, an immense political battle is shaping up against Big Sugar and the flashy sugar food establishment. Stripped of marketing and packaging, this is sugar in the raw. 360,000 metric tons arriving to feed the sugar habit of a continent. Sugar is ground from hills of sugar beets, boiled from fields of corn, but this is the old-fashioned kind, from sugarcane. It goes through an industrial process that removes all fiber, all minerals, all the good stuff, leaving a crystalline chemical called sucrose. The average person in the Western world consumes the equivalent of 25 of these 2-kilo, 5-pound bags every year, mostly hidden in processed food and drink. The sheer quantity makes sugar a key suspect in the worldwide obesity crisis. Big Sugar denies any connection. But the companies are worried about lawsuits for the way they push sugar, marketing it even to the very young.
All over America and the world, there are companies shredding documents. I have no doubt about that. They do not want to have exposed on discovery the ways in which they deliberately formulate their products in order to attract young children.
The battle against Big Sugar in the 21st century has its roots in the 18th century, when Big Sugar was at the heart of slavery. It's the story of the first human rights movement in history. It's the story of those who imagined the first political poster and the first campaign button. Those who risked careers and sometimes lives to take on Big Sugar. Adam Hochschild, author of Bury the Chains.
The interesting thing about sugar is that the battle goes on. In the 18th century, sugar was the target of progressives because it was so intricately tied to slavery. Today, we're fighting sugar for other reasons, the obesity epidemic being perhaps the major one. The industry remains strong, it remains powerful, and it still needs to be fought.
On the 10th floor of the New York University Department of Nutrition and Food Studies works a woman who, in a sense, is a descendant of activists who fought Big Sugar in ages past. Marion Nestle is a writer, a professor, and a nutritional scientist, a provocative critic of the food industry and its power. Big Sugar attacks her as an hysterical anti-food industry fanatic. She responds with sweet reason.
I'm not saying that sugar is a poison. Sugar is fine in small quantities. Sweet things help people, eat things, it helps the medicine go down. But we're talking about absolutely ridiculous amounts of sugars. Nobody is complaining about a spoonful or two of sugar on cereal. The problem is that sugars are in everything.
Sugar in the morning, sugar in the evening, sugar at supper.
Sugars are in peanut butter, bread, yogurt, hot dogs, hot dog buns, soup, bacon, cough drops, cookies, pickles, salami, soya milk, soda pop, clamato juice, soya sauce, English muffins, Ritz crackers, ketchup, baked beans, baby food, even cigarettes. For a long time, sugar has been successful keeping itself out of the spotlight and in the food. But in comic commercials like this one for a no-sugar diet, the secret is getting out. On average, people are consuming more than their body weight in sugar every year. The jury is out on whether sugar is an addictive drug. But many are becoming aware the substance induces a drug-like dependency. And it's everywhere.
Yeah, the cafeteria, the vending machines, the soda machines. It's hard. Like, it's easier to get yourself some sugar, a sugar rush, than to go get an apple or something when you're at school.
We've become addicted to this need for sugar in all of our food. Like, I'm starving now, and I'm going to go get a muffin just because it'll give me, like, a good fix.
It's being called a toxic food environment.
I would say it's an environment that's extremely supportive of eating foods that are bad for you.
But like if you think about it, all the products that contain sugar, they're a lot cheaper. Like if you want to go buy a bottle of water, it's like $1.50. If you want to buy a can of soda,
It's $1.
It's $1.
The idea that Coke is priced less than water just gives the whole show away. And that has to do with enormously successful industry lobbying.
Nowhere is sugar disguised more effectively than in the kingdom of carbonated sugar beverages. Dr. Joe Schwartz is the director of the Institute for Science and Society at McGill University.
I talk with people who kind of search their soul over how much sugar they should put into their coffee or their tea, whether it should be 1 spoonful or 1.5. Well, the fact is that in something like this, you can have 12 to 15 spoonfuls of sugar, but it's hidden sugar, you don't see it. That's a lot of calories. But the size just keeps increasing. And pretty soon, this will be the single serving of soft drinks. And if you don't want to drink it, you can always go swimming in it.
Again, an ad exaggerates for effect, but the facts about sugars in soda pop are astounding.
You know, if you thought for a minute about the amount of sugars that are in soft drinks, you would realize they're desserts, or as Center for Science and the Public Interest calls them, liquid candy.
Scientific studies are documenting a rising consumption of sugar drinks around the world.
The consumption of soft drinks in North America since 1950 has increased by 500%.
At school, I drank a ton of Coke.
More than 50% of teenagers consume at least 1 soft drink a day.
Maybe 3 of the bottles, 700 milliliters a day.
And many, especially boys, consume 3 or more soft drinks a day.
3 to 5 a day.
So we are awash in this stuff.
I like to teach the world to sing.
The worldwide marketing of sugar water to the young has unforeseen repercussions.
The soda companies have managed to install themselves as popular icons. Nobody ever thinks about the nutritional implications of that, or at least they didn't used to. Part of why the sugar associations are so upset now is that people are starting to think about these things.
The battle against big sugar gathering momentum in the 21st century has deep roots. In the 18th century, with sugar at the heart of slavery, radical and sometimes astonishing tactics were dreamed up to take on the empire of sugar. Dreamed up by some remarkable figures. The story of those dreamers and how they defeated big sugar begins at Cambridge University with Thomas Clarkson's ambition. In 1785, Clarkson was a divinity student determined to win a Latin essay championship. The topic happened to be sugar slavery.
I had only the wish of obtaining literary honor.
Clarkson immersed himself in the subject. The horrors of slavery began to possess him.
In the daytime, I am uneasy. In the night, I have little rest. I always sleep with a candle in the room that I might rise out of bed and put down thoughts as might occur to me, conceiving that no arguments must be lost in so great a cause.
Clarkson won the prize, and in the aftermath, had an epiphany.
He started thinking that if what he had written in this essay were true, then some person should see these calamities to their end. meaning bring an end to slavery in the British Empire.
And so a great movement is born. Clarkson forges a lifelong alliance with the religious Quaker movement. They long had been seeking a mainstream figure to spearhead the fight against slavery. Clarkson becomes the man. In Geneva, at the headquarters of the UN's World Health Organization, delegates are facing an unexpected crisis: the obesity epidemic. For the first time in human history, there are more fat and obese people in the world than hungry people. Dr. Derek Yock is a key strategist for the World Health Organization.
We used to say there were only two large epidemics that we had to deal with worldwide: the epidemic of HIV/AIDS and the epidemic of tobacco. But we really have currently got three big epidemics underway. Obesity has really come out of the shadows far faster than anybody expected.
The evidence that sugar is playing a starring role in the epidemic is a sensitive and controversial issue. The sugar industry says there is no scientific proof that too much sugar makes people fat. University of Toronto nutritionist Dr. Harvey Anderson is a scientific advisor to the sugar food industry.
The evidence hasn't proven sugar guilty in that kind of global, magic bullet kind of approach that people would like to take. The origins of obesity, the origins of disease are much more complex.
At the UN, Dr. Kari Norum listens carefully to Big Sugar's arguments. Formerly Dean of Medicine and President of the University of Oslo, Dr. Norum chairs a team of the world's top nutritionists, alarmed at what they see.
The marketing of these drinks has taken the population, it is fantastic increase in sugar consumption due to this. And that has revealed the problem. Whole populations are overeating sugar.
The dangers of sugar? Harvard Medical School tracked the pop consumption of 548 kids for 19 months. The results of this and other studies are shocking. The sugars in 1 can a day were enough to add more than 4 kilos, 10 pounds of body weight a year. More than 1 can increased the chance of obesity by 60%.
It's suggestive, but it's certainly not proof of cause and effect.
A scientist at the Toronto Hospital for Sick Children is looking for cause and effect. Dr. Khosrow Adeli sees a disturbing trend.
We have been noticing a significant increase in the number of kids presenting with obesity and type 2 diabetes.
They focus on fructose as a suspect. It's the main sugar in high fructose corn syrup. A multitude of these products are sweetened by this super sugar, especially soda pop.
But what we're talking about is a high fructose corn syrup. This is a synthetic, man-made product. It is not a natural product. It is extremely dangerous, and it uses corn, which is a high glycemic food, and it puts sucrose into it with a touch of the fructose. And this creates a real problem. High fructose corn syrup, and it makes our kids exceedingly fat. It turns off parts of the brain that recognize when you've eaten enough, and it makes you fat. What we have to understand is just what is the problem. We have two basic types of sugar, right-handed glucose and left-handed fructose. These type of things. Now, the fructose will have to go to the liver to be broken down into a form of glucose that then can be used in the rest of the body. Thereby we have a problem, whereas fructose does not make the blood sugar go up very highly, but the dextrose, glucose, sucrose, high fructose corn syrup, this has a dramatic high glycemic index, throwing lots of sugar into the blood, producing an increase in insulin, increase in cortisol. It weakens the immune system, weakens the nerves, and the high fructose corn syrup is extremely dangerous, even more dangerous than the cane sugar. We must be able to get back to in touch with nature and use natural. This high fructose corn syrup is really a problem. And scientists now have declared war on the sugar compounds. We must realize that this increase in our blood sugar, producing hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia in this cycle, is what creates a problem. And white sugar really is one of the four horsemen, the white horse of conquest. We must look at this. And we must even realize that these synthetic sugar copies make you fatter as well, turn off parts of the brain. We must recognize that there are some healthy sugars that you can get. Stevia, barley malt, date sugar. But the key is natural. We want to get natural fruit sugars with a low glycemic index. But mainly, fruits are your sugars. This is what is really working, and no research shows that fruits are bad for you. But there's a host of research that shows that the sucrose, the glucose, and the high fructose corn syrup is bad for you. We continue our battle against the ultra-rich, Desi versus the Goliaths, as they lie and twist and steal to try to tell us and sell us.
Syrian golden hamsters, with a metabolism similar to humans, are fed a diet high in fructose. They fatten within 2 weeks. Humans react the same way. Fructose seems to make you fat whether or not you exercise. In fact, the more fructose you consume, the hungrier you seem to get. McGill's Dr. Schwartz.
It actually increases the tendency to eat more food at a subsequent meal.
An overload of fructose, say a couple of cans of pop a day, can set off a slow-motion chain reaction in the body, with a terrible result.
Our conclusion is that clearly fructose is a major contributor to the current epidemic of obesity and early onset type 2 diabetes.
At the UN, Dr. Derek York.
People think of obesity as a cosmetic issue still. And so we see a lot more people getting fatter around us, and it's going to be awkward when you're sitting on airplanes and clothing sizes are going up. We're seeing the impact in terms of type 2 diabetes. Diabetes that I learned as a medical school was called maturity onset diabetes. It's now having its onset in late teens and 20s and 30s. And the consequences are that people lose their limbs early, they go blind early, they lose their kidneys, they get cardiovascular disease.
Worldwide, diabetes now kills 3.2 million people a year, 8,700 a day, 6 people every minute. Goliath Casket. On the net at oversizedcasket.com. Supersized coffins for the supersized dead. Along with more cancer and more heart attacks, death by diabetes is a major consequence of a new kind of sugar slavery, the obesity epidemic. In the 18th century, starting his campaign against Big Sugar, Clarkson is up against not so much a mighty brand as an entire empire, with sugar at its heart. The anthem Rule Britannia pledged Britons never would be slaves. But nobody gave a second thought to enslaving Africans, the people thought to have no souls.
Men from England bought and sold me, paid my price in paltry gold.
A freed slave named Olida Akiano wrote a book documenting slavery's horrors. It gave slavery a human face. His readings became one of the first book tours in history, one of many firsts for the anti-slavery movement.
We have here an illustration of a slave ship.
Almost any political organizing technique that we use in democratic countries today was really invented or perfected by British anti-slavery activists between 1787 and 1792. the political poster. And we have all seen this image, a top-down diagrammatic view of slaves packed like sardines into a slave ship. This was devised in 1789. They rapidly turned it into a poster and put it up in pubs all over England.
Ordinary Britons began debating sugar slavery and signing petitions in protest.
The planters were, of course, appalled when the movement began. You can see some of this through the eyes of the principal lobbyist for the planters of Jamaica in London, who was a man named Stephen Fuller.
What is this? People signing petitions to Parliament by the thousands about something not affecting the petitioners themselves.
He was really seeing something new in human history, because this was the first time that large numbers of people got agitated over something that was happening to other people on the other side of an ocean.
On the other side of an ocean, in another time, a small battle against Big Sugar takes shape. In the tradition of those who fought Big Sugar centuries ago, Nicholas Dodds decided one day that a line had been crossed. He's a student at a York Regional School in Aurora, Ontario. At first, it wasn't a health issue. It was the cola commercialization of the schools.
They're selling the students' attention spans to, these large corporations. How many vending machines do we have in our school? Something like 5 or 6. What if I just don't want to, have my mental space, interrupted by their advertising garbage all day?
Nicholas enlisted the help of his father, Jack, who was immediately intrigued.
There ought to be at least one little comfort zone where we don't have to constantly be on our guard against all these commercial messages.
What was the deal with Pepsi? The school board admitted in an email there was a contract. Nicholas asks for a copy.
So about 30 days later, we get back a letter saying, "Dear Mr. Nicholas Dodds, there is no such contract between the York Region School Board and Pepsi Bottling Company. Please go away now." And, we had an email from the school board saying, hey, there's a contract.
The Dodds petitioned Ontario's Privacy Commissioner to force the school board to disclose the Pepsi contract, as well as another huge Ontario school board contract with Coke. On campuses at every level, Coke and Pepsi are in a war to brand students as young as possible. Jack Dodds is worried about the health implications.
The thing that I find shocking is that the people who are running the schools don't want to know about this.
The more pop sold, the more the schools get. Dr. Marion Nessel.
And so you have this situation that puts the schools in the position of pushing soft drinks. The principal is a pusher of soft drinks. If you substituted the word cigarettes for that, you would understand what the implications of that are.
The Dodds are battling big sugar companies sensitive about their brand. 200 years ago, the anti-slavery movement was the first to put big sugar on the defensive. To put a positive spin on sugar slavery, the West Indian planters came up with what they thought was a winning campaign. They financed a play.
The Benevolent Planters. 2 Negro lovers are cruelly separated in Africa. They end up living side by side on plantations in Barbados. The kindly plantation owners reunite the lovers. It opens at the Theatre Royal in Haymarket in a fortnight.
Clarkson and the movement countered with a pioneering piece of public relations designed by Josiah Wedgwood.
He proposed it as a seal for letters, but also as a cameo to be worn as a brooch.
The campaign button, which you wear promoting a political candidate today, the anti-slavery movement had one, and it was, so far as we know, the first widely reproduced logo that was explicitly designed for a political cause.
The Dodds don't need a logo once the media catches wind of their campaign against Big Sugar.
three major Toronto papers.
Yeah.
Once they
picked up on
the 13-year-old grade 7 student, grade 8 student angle, they went nuts. They just loved that.
One day there's a commotion at school. A decision has come down.
Unbeknownst to me, during the day, there had been, like satellite trucks pulling up in front of the school and, people swarming the office and calling the office and, just terribly bogging them down, saying, oh, can we have an interview with, the Pepsi kid?
In the aftermath, Ontario bans soda pop machines in elementary schools. The Dodds can take a lot of credit for a battle won, but not the war. Coke and Pepsi are still firmly ensconced in Ontario high schools, selling water and craftily named fruit drinks, which are just as sugar-saturated as pop. Many of the tactics of modern corporate strategy were actually developed by Big Sugar to fight the anti-slavery movement. Sugar planters tried rebranding.
Let the Negroes be called assistant planters.
Very good point.
It didn't work, especially when word got out about planter justice. In Barbados, 4 sugar slaves are accused of murdering a white man.
And it was a murder which most people in the island, black and white, felt that these slaves had not committed, but they were being set up so that the real murderer, a white man, could go free.
One by one, they are executed by being burned alive. Horrors committed to put spoonfuls of sugar in cups of English tea. The anti-slavery movement began getting the message across. For those on the front lines of the obesity crisis, the enemy is inside the gates.
Would the orderly on duty please come to reception?
The Toronto Sick Kids Hospital. They sold the exclusive rights to sick children and their parents to a consortium of fast food companies, including, for a bargain basement $20,000, exclusive pouring rights to Coca-Cola. Everywhere, children are targeted as never before, and it works. Kids are now drinking twice as much soda pop as milk, a total reversal in only 20 years. The result of ruthless marketing, on TV and off.
There's so much soft drink consumed by American children that the Department of Agriculture has statistics on soft drink consumption by children under the age of 2.
Around the world, 18 million children under the age of 5 are overweight. In Canada and the United States, the number of overweight teenagers has tripled since 1980. It's now 1 in 5. Celebrities have long been a key part of Big Sugar's push to reach the young. Hockey star Wayne Gretzky used to wear Coke's colors, and before that, 7-Up. But now he's a Pepsi guy.
Of course they would want Wayne Gretzky, because if Wayne Gretzky drinks Pepsi-Cola, it must be great.
Basically, Pepsi is selling sugar water to kids, and Wayne Gretzky is helping them do it.
Well, you know what? I'm a parent, and I have 12-year-old kids, and I have a 14-year-old kid, and I have a 4-year-old son, and I'm no different than any other parent. You have to monitor what your kids eat, what they drink. Everything in life is moderation. But each parent has to be a parent and understand that that's a responsibility for a parent.
But now kids are basically drinking twice as much soda pop as they are milk, and it's having an enormous impact on their weight, on their teeth.
Absolutely, and you got to be careful of that. You know, in this life, you only get one opportunity. It's not a dress rehearsal, but at the end of the day, Pepsi does a lot of great things for communities and minor hockey and minor sports all across this country.
But the sugar in Pepsi seems to relate directly to the growing wave of obesity.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
You know, they must have paid him a lot of money to do that. I wish he hadn't done it.
In the Caribbean, descendants of sugar slaves celebrate the anti-slavery movement. Historian Marcia Burrows says one campaign caught the imagination of the empire.
One of the campaign measures was to make the average British person feel that every time they took sugar, they were drinking blood. That sugar is equated to the blood of the slaves. So that it took so many ounces of blood to produce this. Why are you buying sugar from the West Indies?
Losing the battle for public opinion, the plantation owners call on science for help.
Sugar is not a luxury, but a necessary of life.
Very good point.
And a great injury have many persons done to their constitutions by totally abstaining from it.
And there was one crackpot physician, Dr. Frederick Slayer, who advocated using sugar for cleaning teeth. And I'm not sure that even the sugar industry would do that today.
At the UN's World Health Organization, known as the WHO, nations gather for a summit to finalize a global strategy to deal with the obesity crisis. To satisfy competing interests, the UN wants to make sure they have the science right. A panel of the world's top nutritionists, led by Dr. Carrie Norum, is asked to recommend a safe level of sugar in the diet. This commercial for a no-sugar diet spoofs the sugar industry report that 25% of your food can be safely sugar. At the UN, the Norum Task Force recommends that a diet should be no more than 10% sugar, the equivalent of the sugars in a single can of soda pop.
We see the statistics from many countries now that young people have about 20% of the energy from sugar, and most of that comes from sweetened sodas. Then we have to cry out to see this is dangerous in the long run.
The Norum Task Force report is called 916. To make the 10% sugar level work, it recommends that Big Sugar not be allowed to target children with ads like this. The sugar industry responds by attacking the science. At the UN, Big Sugar is represented by this rep from the sugar food industry and this delegate from the sugar water industry. They duck interviews, but Big Sugar's strong views are available online.
They say your report was junk science, it's not proven. Pop science myth from public health zealots is the notion that the sugar in soda causes obesity. The mass media and public health control freaks build their case on sensationalistic quicksand.
Well, they are shooting themselves in the foot by saying this, because this is ridiculous. People knowing about connection between diet and health know that types of citation is completely wrong and is false lobbying and false. So I'm astonished that a serious industry can use arguments like that.
Dr. Norum has no idea the trouble he is stirring up. His nemesis is this polite, 35-year-old envoy from the Bush administration, William Steiger. The U.S. position on Norum's 916 report is the same as Big Sugar's.
We criticize 916 in part because some of the conclusions were not, in the opinion of the top scientists on nutrition and genetics in the United States, didn't reflect the best science available.
That's not my opinion. I have a very good connection with the best United States scientists on this topic, and they fully endorse it. So it's, if you are picking scientists paid by the industry, you get the answer you want.
The sugar industry's Dr. Anderson dismisses Norum's UN report.
They can have their opinions. I'm just telling you my belief is that the U.S. has produced a science-based report.
Whenever I hear the word science-based, and I'm a scientist, my PhD is in molecular biology. Whenever I hear the word science-based, I know that self-interest is at work. They're not really talking about science. Because if you're really talking about science, you say the science is incomplete and uncertain, but it points in a direction. We have plenty of evidence that kids who drink soft drinks are fatter. That's all. What more do you need?
The U.S. administers the coup de grace. Unless the 10% recommendation on sugar is removed, the U.S. threatens to remove its $300 million in funding to the WHO.
They're worried that if people start doing something about obesity, they'll eat less sugar, and that will be very bad for business.
The Bush administration and Big Sugar send the scientists packing.
We consider that the revised text offers a very balanced compromise between the...
A Motherhood resolution is prepared. All references to the dangers of too much sugar are dropped. In the aftermath, Big Sugar takes radical steps to ensure that the World Health Organization will not act again anytime soon. Dr. Derek Yock, a key architect of the UN strategy on obesity, is demoted and reassigned. Marion Nestle says the industry always plays hardball.
In the late 1970s, when there was an effort made to try to curb food marketing to children, the people who tried to curb it got their heads cut off and handed to them on a platter. I mean, they were just destroyed in the process. Everybody lost jobs. It was really a disaster, and nobody has dared to try it since.
Campaigning against Big Sugar has always been perilous. In 1787, Clarkson was going to get slave ship captains prosecuted for murder. They decided to get rid of him.
It instantly struck me that they had a design to throw me over the pierhead. There was not a moment to lose. I darted forward. One of them, against whom I pushed myself, fell down, and I escaped. Not without blows, amidst their imprecations and abuse.
Big Sugar has played a tremendous, I can say, bad guy role. And of course they are very influential in lots of countries, especially in the United States, where the sugar is high politics.
Florida, where Big Sugar's power has caught Hollywood's eye. There's a movie in the works, inspired by a Palm Beach family of controversial sugar barons. Jose Pepe Fanjul is one of the famous Fanjuls, the powerful Cuban exile family that owns a sugar empire worth almost $1 billion. The Fanjuls are famed for their donations to Republican and Democratic politicians. In return, they receive generous servings of public money in the form of price supports for the family sugar business. It's called welfare for the well-off. Big Sugar's access to power is legendary, but the Bush administration's William Steiger says their influence is not what it was.
I don't know who Big Sugar is, but sugar as a crop is far less important at our time than it was 100 years ago or 500 years ago.
I suspect the Fanjul brothers would be upset with you to hear you say that sugar is no longer important. It seems to play an enormous importance in American political life, contributing substantial funds to presidential campaigns and members of Congress to maintain these extraordinary price supports.
I think you could find representatives from any industry, from any agricultural commodity that have contributed in our free and open political system. It's their right to do so.
There's one more question for Mr. Steiger, prompted by a rumor he has a powerful godfather.
Are you really the first President Bush's godson?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
For those who dared to fight Big Sugar long ago, it ended this way, with a coffin at a chapel in the Caribbean. It was a funeral for slavery, held before the dawn of the first day of August, 1838. the day enslavement finally was ended in the British Empire.
On the stroke of midnight, slaves placed in a coffin a whip, an iron punishment collar, and some slave chains, took it outside and buried it in the churchyard.
At the service, there's a portrait of Thomas Clarkson, an old man now, but much honored for a long twilight struggle that had begun at Cambridge University 61 years before. In the 21st century, a different kind of slavery is being fought. There are 1 billion overweight people on the planet, 300 million of them clinically obese. And in every country, for the most part, they are an underclass. The big sugar diet is all they can afford. It enslaves them. To free them, says Marion Nestle, big sugar must be prosecuted like big tobacco.
It's the only thing that will work. They have extraordinary access to the highest levels of government. They attack the science. They argue in all of the ways that tobacco companies argued that tobacco was a perfectly okay product, and they argue personal responsibility in the same way. They behave like big tobacco. They need to be treated like big tobacco.
In the end, though, the most disturbing dimension of the big sugar story is slavery, in the old sense of the word. It survives on plantations across the Dominican Republic, where 650,000 Haitians toil in a sugar industry dominated by 3 big companies. They are a people in torment. Families desperately trying to survive. On the $2 US a man is paid for cutting a ton of sugar cane. At the company store, the underpaid workers are cheated out of even that meager wage. As a result, most of the men head off for 12 hours of cutting cane, having not eaten. They are hungry all day.
De hombre está trabajando como hambre, comprar la cosa ajena no puede pagar. La gente está malo para mí, para todo el mundo.
¿Cuándo fue que ella murió?
Thomas Clarkson would have loved Father Christopher Hartley.
En el cielo no se pica caña, vámonos caminando.
The worker's wife, the mother of his 8 children, died 3 hours ago, killed by poverty and oppression on a plantation owned by the Dominican government. The priest has been here for 8 years, agitating to end slavery. Today he's visiting workers on a 240,000-acre estate owned by Florida's Fanjul family. Here 90,000 souls live in 183 shantytowns on the plantation. The priest says the story of one cane worker illustrates the company's indifference to the plight of its workers. Eugenio Martinez was blinded when an ox cart tire exploded. He was awarded a pension so paltry he had to go back to the fields.
Sí, ciego, estuve picando caña 10 años después que ensegué para mantener mis hijos, porque no quiero que hicieran lo mal hecho.
Father Hartley says the men who own these plantations have a lot to answer for. Florida's Jose Pepe Fanjul owns the biggest, Central Romana.
How would you respond to those who hold the opinion that you are running a plantation that harks back to the days of slavery?
I will ask them, why are they writing that? If you go to Central Romana, if anybody has gone there, you'll see that a couple of years ago we got the prize of the most progressive company in Latin America.
Father Hartley says he'd like to give Mr. Fanjul a tour of his own property.
The only excuse that I could find for him, and his only argument, I hope, that he could invoke is ignorance. The fact that he did not know in what living conditions his workers had helped him amass the fortune and the company that he claims to be so proud of.
In a shanty town owned by a Dominican corporation, a baby dies from the shocking conditions that prevail on sugar plantations across the country. On his eye is a coin to pay the boatman to ferry him across the river of death. Father Hartley conducted the funeral.
The Dominican Republic, when it was discovered by Christopher Columbus, he truly thought that he had discovered the land of paradise described in the first book of the Bible. For many tourists today, in the winter season, it is a kind of paradise. These people live, born, and die in this same paradise, but they live in it as slaves.
Once the empire of sugar was defeated by a campaign dramatizing the dreadful connections between sugar and slavery. Sugar slavery is back, more powerful than ever. Now sugar is not only devastating for those who harvest it, but deadly for those who consume too much. The world freed itself of sugar slavery once. The moment has come again.
Fruits are your best sugars. This is where we need to get fruits, fruit juice, none of this sugar cane, none of these high glycemic foods, none of the high fructose corn syrups. We do not need these. We need to get really good natural fruits, but not in excess, in moderate amounts. But these are sweet foods, and they will help us in 1,000 different ways. This is what we need as a human race. This is what we need to get to across to our children. We can have sweet things. Sweet things can be very good for us. But we need to recognize that this big sugar complex, this evil monetary entity, is trying to deceive us, trying to twist research, trying to tell us that fructose is bad, trying to tell us that fruits are bad. There's no research that shows that. No research whatsoever. The research on the fructose is on the high fructose corn syrup. Don't believe all that the ultra-rich have to tell you. In this battle that we have with the ultra-rich, big tobacco, big sugar, big pharma, big media, big banking, big money, there's a continuous fight. We must be ever vigilant.